Just when I thought that Chris Hemsworth had turned a corner when he recently admitted how garbage Love and Thunder actually was, he goes and says something like this, which pretty much exposes just how soft the comic book movie genre has made people inside and outside of Hollywood. Let's discuss.
Our content sucks. Our content sucks.
I watch so you don't have to.
All I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.
I think it needs to be studied how Chris Hemsworth could have been the next Arnold Schwarzenegger-esque action star, but instead he chose to do goofy Taika Waititi Thor movies and completely ruined his image.
Why?
When Chris came out recently and talked about how he couldn't forgive himself for what happened with Love and Thunder, I gained a bit of respect for him, because it's one thing to sign up to make one of the worst movies I've ever seen. It's another thing altogether to recognize that you f***ed up, admit it, and hopefully learn from it. And that's where we were with Chris Hemsworth. I was hoping that he would take this knowledge that he now has and apply it to every single movie he's a part of in the future. But no, that doesn't appear to be the case, because now, just a couple of weeks later, it appears that Chris isn't willing to accept valid criticism even from the most reliable sources. While Chris was out promoting his new film, Furiosa, he did an interview with Variety, where he talked about how it bothered him when Marvel movies were bashed by the likes of Martin Scorsese and others, saying, quote, "It felt harsh, especially from heroes. It was an eye roll for me. People bashing the superhero space. Those guys had films that didn't work too. We all have. When they talked about what was wrong with superheroes, I thought, cool. Tell that to the billions who watch them. Were they all wrong? Cinema going did not change because of superheroes, but because of smartphones and social media. Superhero films actually kept people in the cinemas during that transition, and now people are coming back. So they deserve a little more appreciation."
You serious?
Okay, so there's a lot to unpack here, so I'm going to go point by point to prove that 90% of what he just said is bull. First of all, when the likes of Scorsese or Tarantino or whoever have criticized Marvel somewhat recently, it's most likely because they were asked a question and they responded honestly. It's not like they were going out of their way to bash Marvel films. In fact, bashing these films isn't exactly how I would describe valid criticism. This is like when I criticize something and people call me a hater. It's literally no different. What it is people unwilling to hear a different perspective and unable to differentiate between criticism and hate. It's weak-minded shit, and anyone who responds to criticism in that way isn't interested in having a conversation about films. They are only interested in deflecting.
You're pathetically predictable.
And yes, it is correct. Every single director, outside of one, in my opinion, has made a film that hasn't worked. However, one could argue that these directors' worst films are still worth watching, unlike the schlock that Marvel typically gives us. Do you know that I can't name a single Marvel film that's came out in the past 15 years that I've had the desire to rewatch? The issue isn't that the MCU contains a lot of forgettable films. The issue is that they are so forgettable, so familiar, so indistinguishable from each other that they all run together and makes it very difficult for me to have interest in revisiting them. If you've seen one, you've seen them all, and you can't say the same thing about these iconic directors' worst films. You could try to say that, but you would be wrong. Chris also says that when people talk about what is wrong with superheroes, his response is, cool, tell that to the billions of people who watch them. Spoken like a true shill. Spoken like a true fanboy. Is this Chris Hemsworth, the world-famous actor? Or your average social media apologist? Honestly, I can't tell the difference. People who respond to criticism by saying, well, a lot of people seem to like it, and you're in the minority here. Why exactly should I take anyone who thinks that way seriously? They are the living embodiment of a sheep. Unless you agree with the majority, you're wrong. You're toxic, you're a hater. Well, guess what? I can throw out labels and dismissive comments too. So to answer your question, Chris, yes, a lot of those billions of people were wrong, because they allowed their fandom to blind them, and they became complacent and accepted whatever they were given. He then talks about how cinema wasn't ruined by superheroes, it was ruined by smartphones and social media. Now, while I agree with the smartphone and social media observation, that's the 10% he got right.
So you're telling me there's a chance?
I would argue that superhero films, and more specifically MCU films, have done more damage to the public's perception of what film is or can be than any other franchise in history. Yes, you cannot deny that these films made money and they kept people coming to the theaters once upon a time. But that onslaught of support came at a price, because a lot of those audiences were programmed into believing that the MCU way of making films is the only way to make films. That's why we ended up with so many franchises around that time trying to emulate that formula. Because at the time, that's what people supported, so the studios took that as that's what people wanted. Who needs a story when you have Easter eggs, cameos, and cringe comedy to pass the time? And you wonder why Scorsese called them theme park rides, because that's exactly what they are. That is valid criticism.
That makes sense.
Nobody is saying that these films shouldn't exist. But what we are saying is they should not dominate the market to the point where other films can't exist. And if you can't see that, and you can't feel the impact of that still on movies to this day, then I don't know what to tell you. It sounds like Chris, similar to your average fanboy, is seeing and hearing what he wants. I don't give a fuck how much money these movies made. I see absolutely zero of those profits. What I care about is getting quality and variety in my entertainment, and the MCU robbed me of that at one point in time. And yes, these movies did keep people in cinemas. They were considered events by some once upon a time. But like any fad, it's kind of run its course. And if you really want to talk box office, well, the recent string of flops, including Love and Thunder, say that people have grown tired of the same old bullshit.
My, how the tables have turned.
Chris Hemsworth says that they deserve more appreciation. I say that they need to re-earn that appreciation. And that involves people like Chris using their influence to not allow movies like Love and Thunder to ever exist again. Maybe don't sign up for a sequel where a hack director like Taika Waititi actively admitted beforehand that he's going to give us a Thor that nobody wants. Maybe don't sign up for a movie that turns a once iconic and badass character like Thor into a fat slob and a joke. The truth is that Chris Hemsworth could have protected these movies. He could have protected this character and avoided all of this harsh criticism. But instead, he was complacent and accepted the paycheck anyway.
Get what you deserve!
So don't come to me crying when your films are rightfully criticized for being lesser forms of entertainment, because that's what they are. You have the power to change that, Chris. You have the power to walk into Marvel Studios' offices and demand that George Miller direct the next Thor movie. And then while you're at it, tell Marvel Studios to maybe stay out of the way and let George do what he needs to do to fix this mess, instead of cutting his balls off like they've done with so many directors before him. Directors like Martin Scorsese could never work under the Marvel Studios banner because they value things like creative freedom. They make a film because they're passionate about the story, not because someone tells them what to do or because they want to piss people off on purpose.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him.
Maybe it's a sign that you should listen to people like Martin Scorsese instead of taking offense to everything that he says. He might have some decent insight as it pertains to how to tell a story properly. But we all know that's not what Marvel wants. They want puppets, they want yes men, they want hired hands. They want someone that they can control. And that right there is a big reason why some people criticize these movies. Until you change that problem, these movies will continue to be criticized, and they will become less and less relevant with each release.
Y'all be cool. Right on.